the early 1770s, Williamsburg was still Virginia's colonial capital. A town where government buildings stood alongside homes, shops, and taverns, and daily life unfolded under the quiet presence of politics. Down Duke of Gloucester Street, apprentices hurried to their workshops, dodging rattling carriages, while the savory smells of roasting meat and bubbling stews drifted from kitchens and taverns, wrapping the town in the textures and sounds of everyday colonial life. At the center of the city, its neatly trimmed lawns opened wide, leading directly to the governor's palace. With its brick walls, high roofline, and formal gardens, the palace was more than a home. It was a statement of royal authority, a visible reminder that the king's presence extended across the Atlantic into Virginia. In 1771, following the death of the governor before him, John Murray, the fourth Earl of Dunmore, arrived to assume his role as Virginia's new royal governor. A Scotsman with military experience, he would have stepped through the grand entrance hall of the palace onto its white Purbeck stone and black Belgian marble floors laid in an irregular pattern to find the walnut walls probably painted a pale hue, lined with an impressive display of muskets and swords. To him, the room would have spoken the language of order and discipline, a confirmation of the duty that had shaped him well before he arrived in Williamsburg. A glance into his past hinted that Dunmore's early months were a delicate balance of observation and cautious action. He held receptions in the ballroom, dinners in the formal dining room, and met frequently with planters, burgesses, and clergy who watched his temperament closely. Meanwhile, for nearly 3 years after his arrival in Williamsburg, the rooms upstairs in the palace remained mostly silent and cold, their hearths unlit, with his wife and children still living far away back in England. The reasons for their delay in arrival were uncertain. Dunmore loosely claimed it was his dread of them acclimating to the Virginia climate, while suspicions of affairs with prominent women of the colony might have hinted at more personal motives, if true. Although the palace was quite impressive without his family there, I imagined it would have felt rather hollow. A royal living quarters staged for authority rather than a comforting home. In modern times, archaeological traces later revealed a living, working household. Fragments of ceramics and glass, remnants from the kitchens and outbuildings, and gardens carefully tended by enslaved laborers who kept the palace functioning. Outside, life in Williamsburg moved in its steady rhythm. Students debated in the shadow of the Wren building. Merchants argued over imported goods. Taverns would have hummed with the talk of taxes and the growing dissatisfaction in the colony. From the palace windows, Dunmore would have observed it all, and probably with a mix of curiosity and concern in his eyes. Piecing together the timeline of Dunmore's reign in Williamsburg, It surprised me to discover how often he seemed to try to govern Virginia on his own, suspending the House of Burgesses when it disagreed with him. When he called the assembly to meet in March of 1773, in the lead-up, a group of Patriot Burgesses had met at the Raleigh Tavern beforehand to draft a resolution that would pitch forming a committee of correspondence for Virginia in response to British policies and abuses. This would allow them to organize communication with other colonies on vital happenings, as well as unfair acts of Parliament, including overreach by the Gaspee Commission the previous year, a royal commission King George III established to identify those responsible for burning the British customs vessel Gaspee. The accused were to be transported back to England to stand trial, instead of being tried in the local court system. The colonists saw this as a violation of their rights. The resolution drafted at the Raleigh Tavern by Patrick Henry, Richard Henry Lee and his brother Francis Lightfoot Lee, and Thomas Jefferson and his brother-in-law Dabney Carr, was introduced to the House on March 12, 1773, and passed without hesitation. Soon after, letters were sent from Virginia to the other 12 colonies, suggesting they form committees too. It wasn't even a year later, all of the colonies except Pennsylvania, which delayed, had formed their own committees. Once separated by borders and their own laws, the colonies began taking steps toward unity. As Connecticut wrote,
"The union of the colonies is of utmost importance. A regular correspondence is the most certain means to effect so salutary a design."
Frustrated, Dunmore postponed the assembly, but the representatives of Virginia, unwilling to be silenced, regrouped again at the Raleigh Tavern, just as they had done a handful of years prior when Royal Governor Lord Botetourt dissolved the House for rejecting new taxation. It would be a year later before a formal assembly met again. It wasn't until 1774 that the palace truly came alive. Lady Charlotte Dunmore, with 6 of their children, arrived, and Williamsburg's streets and hearts responded in celebration. As her carriage wound down the Duke of Gloucester Street toward the palace, the city glowed with candles and lanterns in nearly every window. Crowds pressed close, eager to see the governor's wife, a woman whose grace and poise seemed to soften the formality of the city. A grand illumination soon lit the town, with fireworks erupting over the palace. Not quite as grand as the city had hoped, yet she still politely thanked them for their welcome. Williamsburg had embraced her fully, honoring her presence with genuine affection. The city loved her. Inside the palace, the arrival of Lady Dunmore transformed the space. The family apartments upstairs finally became alive with movement. Trunks unpacked, curtains drawn, and children's footsteps echoing throughout. The household servants moved with renewed purpose, tending to daily meals and routines with the energy that comes when a home finally feels complete. I imagine Dunmore standing quietly in the entrance hall, seeming softened by the warmth and life his wife and children brought to the residence. The palace, long a symbol of control in the colony, had suddenly become a home. Looking deeper into his backstory, I learned that one of Dunmore's first real tests came far from Williamsburg. He was pushing settlers into lands beyond the colony's borders to claim new territory, but ran into native peoples defending hunting grounds still vital to their survival. Dispatches were arriving from the western frontier, detailing frequent skirmishes, a stark reminder that the colony's expansion was met with constant resistance and danger. A letter addressed to the governor and the General Assembly by an unnamed Virginian described the heated situation with the Shawnees and their allies, Native American peoples of the Ohio Valley. The message stoked the fires of retaliation and gave the sense that conflict could be just around the corner.
The month of May is the time appointed for the convention of the Assembly, so that it is more probable to suppose those barbarians will be scattering havoc and desolation around, while our House of Burgesses are spending much time in debating in what manner to prohibit such outrages. By convening them a month or two sooner, what mischiefs might not be prevented? You have it now in your power, my lord, to render the name of Dunmore as memorable in Virginia as that of Marlborough is in Great Britain. Do not let slip the golden opportunity.
Early in May of 1774, Lord Dunmore learned that fighting had broken out with Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley and requested that the House approve additional taxes to fund military campaigns against the Shawnee and their Mingo allies over the ongoing land disputes. When the House of Burgesses declined to fund a regular army, Dunmore turned to local militias and settlers, urging them to be ready for possible attacks. Weeks later, on May 24th of 1774, in response to the Intolerable Acts, a series of 4 British laws that included the Boston Port Act, which shut down Boston's harbor to business as a punishment for the Boston Tea Party protest. The reconvened Burgesses passed a resolution that declared June 1st a day of fasting and prayer across Virginia. The same day, the law was set to begin. The resolution they put in place was a quiet but powerful act of unity, a way for Virginians to show they were watching and that they stood with their fellow colonists. Dunmore, seeing this as a challenge, called for the Burgesses to meet him inside the second-floor council chamber within the Capitol building and announced he was dissolving the House. A clear signal that royal command and colonial independence were on a collision course. The Burgesses once again filled the Apollo room inside the Raleigh Tavern the morning of May 27th and plotted the course ahead. I once explored the very room this scene played out, and there imagined the Burgesses bent over papers and conversation, deciding the next moves for a restless colony. At the gathering, they signed a formal pledge that included a boycott of all British goods in the colony and continued talk of resistance against taxation by Parliament without representation from the colonies. They also planned a Virginia convention where delegates would be chosen to take part in what would soon become the First Continental Congress. Surprisingly, even after Dunmore's bold move to dissolve the House of Burgesses, Lady Dunmore's official welcoming ball still went ahead later that very evening. A celebration that had to have been awkward considering all that had taken place. Friendly relations between Dunmore and the Burgesses during the event was most definitely uneasy, but apparently the evening's agenda was still somewhat respectful and orderly. George Washington even attended the occasion, and it was just days prior when he spent the evening at the palace, and the next morning rode with Lord Dunmore to Portobello, the governor's hunting lodge roughly 6 miles north of Williamsburg, to carry out an inspection of the property and to breakfast with him. A location that now sits upon the top secret Camp Perry military reservation in Williamsburg and is not accessible to the public. By the summer of 1774, Dunmore finally set out to assert his royal authority against the Shawnees, a fight he determined couldn't be ignored by this point. Although a rare assignment for a royal governor at the time, Dunmore zeroed his attention on the cause and was focused on militia campaigns hundreds of miles away from Williamsburg in what would eventually be known as Lord Dunmore's War. Life at the palace and in Williamsburg carried on in his absence, quietly unfolding day after day while he was gone. All these years later, I found myself freely wandering its halls, mesmerized by the furnishings and fueled only by the rumor that a few original pieces and other elements uncovered during archaeological digs before the reconstruction can still be seen today. Exploring the room thought to have been where Lady Dunmore once spent time with her children, the fireplace mantel inside here reveals a piece of marble salvaged from the ruins of the original governor's palace.
There's apparently some finding from the excavation that's on a mantle, like a little piece.
Yeah, right there. It's that discolored piece of marble that's right here on the right-hand side.
Oh, wow.
That was found in the rubble when they cleaned it out to rebuild this building. They were able to find out what the fireplace surround looked like, so they incorporated the new one with the piece of the original.
So that piece right there was in the original palace.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And then downstairs in the parlor, in the mantle there's a piece of marble with a deer on it. It's got a couple of cracks, and that came from the first governor's palace as well.
This piece here with the deer is one that was uncovered too.
So that's it right there?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that belonged to Dunmore.
This cloth?
Yeah.
You are kidding me.
He can't pack that one up.
This very one is Dunmore's.
Yes.
I also learned the desk in the corner of the dining room is thought to be an original piece from the governor's personal inventory of items that were auctioned in the colony. Meanwhile, trouble along the Ohio River Valley grew worse as Virginia soldiers continued clashing with Shawnee, Mingo, and Delaware warriors over hunting lands and new colonial settlements. The Shawnee war chief Cornstalk, called Hokalesqua by his people, led his warriors with skill and courage. On the Virginia side, the governor's officers, including Colonel Andrew Lewis, directed the southern division of the militia, with Dunmore himself leading his northern troops. After months of back and forth fighting, the war reached its height at the Battle of Point Pleasant, a bloody clash that some historians argue was the true first battle of the American Revolution. The conflict ended with a peace treaty at Camp Charlotte, which set new borders and briefly quieted the frontier. Yet even with the victory secured, some of those who fought for Dunmore would soon find themselves on uncertain ground, as tensions and change quietly stirred in Virginia. For now, the outcome favored the royal governor. Dunmore returned in late 1774, welcomed back and praised by Virginians after his decisive victory over the Shawnee at Point Pleasant. What followed gave the palace one of its most lasting memories. Soon after his return, Lady Dunmore gave birth to a daughter, the first child ever born inside the governor's palace. They named her Virginia, tying the family's story to the colony itself. For Williamsburg, the timing would have felt almost symbolic. A governor returning in victory and a child born in the capital, each a sign of new strength. Inside the palace, government business might have seemed to pause, replaced by the sounds of family. Children laughing, fires crackling, and the ordinary life of home filling the rooms. But by the mid-1770s, the calm of Williamsburg was starting to unravel. Dunmore, more established in the governor's palace with his wife and children than ever, began to face the growing restlessness of a colony on the brink of revolution. While the ballroom had once echoed with music and dancing, and the supper room with laughter over carefully prepared meals, the tone of conversation was changing. Walking through the upstairs guest room, with its reimagined walls now lined with historical headshots, I assumed the corner canopy bed, probably seldom claimed during those years, was once reserved for the select few gentry invited to stay while conducting business at the palace. Down in the parlor, visitors awaiting the governor's presence sipped their tea with anxious urgency, speaking in quiet tones that hinted at deeper matters. Even the pantry, once just a place for storing provisions, became a space where servants whispered about rumors drifting through the streets. Each room of the palace seemed to carry a burden of its own, a reflection of the growing tension that was beginning to spread through the colony. Below the formal rooms, the cellar stored barrels of wine and ale, further evidence of the palace's everyday operations and necessities. For some reason or another, fate was with me at this very moment. Most of the day, I had been among a myriad of others, curiously exploring the rooms and gardens where the governor once roamed. But suddenly, an enchanting surprise presented itself as solitude sprung upon me. As the dark void of the cellar's opening loomed before me, I cautiously descended into the underworld of the palace's original cellar. I had never ventured here before on any previous visit, so with each step down its narrow staircase, the space around me grew darker and colder, revealing a secret world below. Dunmore was once described as a very good-natured, jolly fellow who loved his bottle. Supposedly known for overindulging in drink, I pictured the barrels around me, once filled to the brim with strong beer, cider, and the wine he so often enjoyed.
And I wonder, is this the original brick from the cellar? It's like a slab of brick, and it definitely looks like the placement of it is from long ago.
An old 1940s diagram I found in my research showed the cellar hallway, flanked by rooms on either side, was once labeled as the cider cellar. Behind locked doors, kitchen staff and house servants would have fetched everything from ale and Madeira to cheese and other food supplies. Wasting no time as I peeked into each room during my free reign exploration. Every dry or chilled compartment felt like a snapshot of time, when this space offered a brief refuge from the daily grind upstairs. I doubt his lordship spent much time down here, if at all. But with the unrest growing in the colony, if he ever sought a quiet hideaway from his responsibilities, the cellar would have filled that need, and his tankard.
If you look up there, you can see rows of glass Madeira bottles, or some sort of wine bottle, kept nice and cool here in the cellar area, which immediately when you step into it, you can feel the temperature drop by at least 10 degrees. It's nice and cool down here.
In those years, it wasn't just in and around the palace, but all over town, where rumors of rebellion drifted down Duke of Gloucester Street, like smoke pouring from the palace's tall double chimneys. Chimneys first etched on the Bodleian plate decades earlier, when the town's future turmoil was still only a faint wisp on the horizon. With a governor recently claiming power over western lands, and the Burgesses quietly resisting English policies in Williamsburg, dating back to the Stamp Act and before, the colony found itself under pressure from nearly every direction. Even with Dunmore's war settled, he remained at the center of it all, a figure that was momentarily celebrated for his victory, yet watched with growing suspicion. Whispers of discontent lingered, debates over taxes, fears of British overreach, rumors of militia activity, and worry over possible enslaved uprisings quietly filled the streets. The palace, standing at the heart of the city, framed Dunmore's uneasy leadership, its halls reflecting a subtle but growing unrest. A reminder that even after securing peace with the Shawnee, neither the city nor its governor could escape the storm building across Virginia and the colonies. A January 14th, 1775 edition of the Virginia Gazette told of orders from London urging royal governors, including Lord Dunmore, to secure every cache of colonial gunpowder. Williamsburg, once the polished capital of Virginia, began to stir with even more nervous expectation. Just months earlier, Massachusetts Royal Governor Thomas Gage had taken the colony's gunpowder from the magazine located in what is now Somerville, Massachusetts. Rumors quickly spread that the British had fired on colonists, trying to stop them. Thousands of local militiamen rushed to respond, only to find the reports were false. As it turned out, the event unknowingly served as a practice run for the coming revolution, showing that the colonies could act fast and were ready to fight if threatened. By the following spring, April 19th, 1775, Gage's troops went again to seize colonial gunpowder. this time in Concord. But there they ran into armed resistance, and the first shots of the American Revolution rang out. News of bloodshed raced south, with stories of militia clashing with British troops, and talk of open revolt now spreading beyond rumor.
At sunrise, they observing between 30 and 40 inhabitants exercising near the meeting house. The commanding officer ordered them to lay down their arms and disperse, which not being directly complied with, he demanded them for a pack of rebels, ordered his men to fire upon them, and killed 8 men upon the spot, besides wounding several more.
Many in Williamsburg must have thought, if Massachusetts had taken up arms, could Virginia be far behind? Suspicion turned toward the governor's palace and its quick-tempered, headstrong master, John Murray, the 4th Earl of Dunmore. It seemed many believed he might try to cripple the colony's defenses before rebellion reached Virginia's doorstep. In the city, there was only one real stockpile of munitions: the powder magazine, the octagonal brick arsenal that stood at the edge of the town for generations. It became the subject of constant conversation. Who controlled the gunpowder kept there? Could the governor seize it? Rumors had already circulated for weeks that Dunmore was already considering his options. At taverns along the Duke of Gloucester Street, voices dropped low, with men leaning in close to share what they had heard. In the shadow of shops and storefronts, townsfolk lingered, their talk focused on strategy and the colony's unrest, not on daily business. Even in the palace itself, the governor would have felt a change in the city as he gazed out its tall windows. Watchful eyes and restless energy, hinting at the uncertainty gripping Williamsburg. Something was coming, and everyone knew it. On the night of April 21st, 1775, barely 2 days after the shots fired at Lexington and Concord, Williamsburg's uneasy calm shattered. Dunmore, well aware that tensions were rising and determined to show royal authority, secretly ordered the gunpowder removed from the magazine. In the early morning hours, Lieutenant Henry Collins, British captain of the schooner Magdalen, and 20 soldiers moved in swiftly with keys to the magazine in hand. 15 half barrels of gunpowder were rolled onto the governor's wagons, secured and loaded for transport. Firearms kept inside were sabotaged, having their gun locks removed, rendering them temporarily unusable. Guards stood watch with musket ready, ensuring no one interfered. But someone caught wind of what was happening and is said to have abruptly alerted the city, but it was too late. The mission was fulfilled, and they escaped with what they had been ordered to heist. Duke of Gloucester Street, usually a place of orderly passage, filled with men running to and from taverns and public houses, trying to understand what had just occurred. The powder magazine, a key repository for the colony's arms and munitions, became the focal point of anger. Williamsburg had been changed in a single night. By early morning, furious citizens, shouting and demanding answers, marched down Palace Green toward the gates of the governor's palace. Inside, from within his personal bedchamber, I imagined a weary Dunmore pausing to consider the unrest quickly spreading through the city, then anxiously descending the palace staircase and entering the entrance hall to assess the commotion and determine the best course of action. With over 200 muskets and swords surrounding him, It said he boasted that he would arm the enslaved servants of the household if he must. Recollections in William Wirt's 1817 biography, Sketches of the Life and Character of Patrick Henry, reveals notes written by local Williamsburg resident St. George Tucker and recalls the rifles in the entranceway. Tucker believed they couldn't have been taken from the magazine during the gunpowder incident without being noticed.
The palace was therefore filled with arms and so on. A considerable number of muskets was always to be seen in the entrance of the palace, where they were arranged upon the walls in an ornamental manner, as in the Tower of London. It was these arms, I suspect, that Lord Dunmore put into the hands of the Marines. He could not have brought them from the magazine after the removal of the powder without discovery, or without opposition.
Thinking about the whole ordeal that took place here left me reeling at the thought of an uprising against British authority in Williamsburg. Something not witnessed in nearly a century at that point, since Nathaniel Bacon and his rebel forces stormed the State House in Jamestown. A story I had explored while making my documentary, Burning Jamestown. News of the seizure reached every corner of Williamsburg, and the city's sense of stability fractured. The colonists interpreted Dunmore's actions as a direct challenge. The removal of the gunpowder became a clear symbol of royal overreach, and the incident only strengthened patriot organization in the colony. Local militias across Virginia readied themselves, anticipating further trouble after the theft. Dunmore's decision, driven by both caution and military instinct, had unintended consequences. Instead of securing authority, he deepened mistrust. Citizens who already struggled to treat him with respect he sought now openly spoke his name with doubt and reluctance. The governor's palace, standing at the heart of Williamsburg, remained a beacon of royal power. But outside its walls, the city was awakening to the reality that their governor's actions might push Virginia toward open conflict. Williamsburg would never again look at the palace or its governor in the same way. Dunmore defended his seizure of the powder, insisting it was a precaution to protect the munitions and prevent a potential uprising among the enslaved population. Despite numerous rumors of insurrection even prior to the incident, most citizens ignored the explanation. With outrage spreading quickly and bodies of armed men arriving in the city, few believed the governor's reasoning, and many considered it an act of aggression.
Parties of armed men were continually coming into town from the adjacent counties the following days, offering fresh insults. From a body of 2,000 armed men who were collected in the neighborhood of Fredericksburg, about 100 miles from this place, and who only waited to be informed by these messengers that I would deliver up the powder, as they were determined otherwise to proceed to Williamsburg and assault my house, and spare neither me nor any person adhering to me.
As the situation progressed, Dunmore escalated his warnings. He threatened that if the city and approaching militia did not back down, he would enlist enslaved men to fight for him, and, if necessary, reduce Williamsburg itself to ashes.
I have already signified to the magistrates of Williamsburg that I expect them on their allegiance to fall upon means of putting a stop to the march of the people now on their way before they enter this city. But otherwise, I shall be forced, and it is my fixed purpose, to arm all my own servants and receive all others that will come to me, whom I shall declare free.
The threat hung over the city like a storm cloud, heightening fear and uncertainty among its citizens. Seeing the city on the edge, Peyton Randolph and other colonial leaders stepped in to calm the growing unrest. They communicated with Dunmore, spoke with anxious residents, and worked to project a sense of control, emphasizing negotiation over confrontation. Randolph understood that any misstep could ignite violence, and his careful intervention helped prevent an immediate clash, while the militia continued its approach. Once Randolph learned that Patrick Henry and his growing militia from various counties were already marching toward Williamsburg, he immediately dispatched word to Henry. His message cautioned him that Dunmore had vowed to emancipate enslaved men to fight on his side if his men came within 30 miles of Williamsburg. The warning underscored the danger of advancing too close and forced the rebel forces to think twice about their approach. Was the gunpowder worth potentially dealing with the repercussions of any severe uprising that surfaced? With anxiety mounting and the ever-present threat of a potential attack by rebel militia and settlers, Dunmore decided to evacuate his wife and children from the palace to a British warship, with him staying behind, clinging to the last threads of his authority in Virginia.
Some of the families have removed from here to avoid the scene that is expected. I have been obliged to send Lady Dunmore and my children on board the man of war, and I shall remain here until I am forced out. But as I cannot expect to be able to make any effectual resistance in this place against the numbers that are said to be moving towards me,
ultimately, a fragile compromise was eventually struck after continuous calls for the return of the gunpowder or payment for it was demanded by Patrick Henry and others. In a surprising stance, and probably strongly considering the potential insurrection of armed enslaved Africans based on Dunmore's threat, the colonists agreed to allow the gunpowder to stay aboard the HMS Fowey, still kept under British guard, with the royal governor agreeing to repay the militia £330 for what had been taken. At Don Castle's Ordinary, roughly 15 miles from Williamsburg, the Receiver General's receipt for the promised sum was delivered. To reduce friction and counter Dunmore's notice of danger, it was accepted by Patrick Henry, whose men remained in camp there on May 4th, 1775. Today, a marker at the site commemorates the transaction and details the history that unfolded there. It was a small concession, yet it spoke volumes. The city had stood its ground. For Dunmore, the event was a blow to his authority, a reminder that even the power of the crown could not fully command Virginia. Williamsburg had made its voice heard, and the balance of power in the colony had begun to tilt in ways that would ripple far beyond the city's streets. Near the end of May of 1775, a severe hailstorm shattered nearly 300 window panes at the governor's palace. I couldn't help but wonder if it were some sort of destructive omen that seemed to mark the final chapter of Lord Dunmore's tenure in the colony. Not long after, in early June of 1775, another attempt was made on the powder magazine when a group of local teens tried to break in, but the British had set a hidden gun that fired when triggered, injuring several of the boys with small pellets. Many Virginians believed Dunmore had ordered the trap and saw it as another ruthless warning. Even before any official offer, some enslaved Virginians saw the unrest in Williamsburg as a chance to escape. Hoping to find protection and support, a number of them fled toward the palace, believing Dunmore might accept them. Their bold attempts to reach the governor foreshadowed the role these freedom seekers would later play in the conflict. As days drug on, yet another attempt was made to raid the magazine. But this time the town militia stood ready. Their presence prevented any further injuries and protected the remaining gunpowder from being seized. For Lord Dunmore, already widely despised, the colony's growing defiance, the rise of armed militias, and threats to royal leadership were the final blows. On June 8, 1775, he and his family, who had returned to the palace only briefly amid the turmoil, fled to the British warship HMS Fowey, leaving royal authority in Virginia to collapse. With Dunmore gone, the palace seemed suspended between order and ruin. Inside, a few servants probably still moved about here and there, unsure whether to keep the governor's routines or simply run away. Their uneasy presence and the absence of the royal governor kept townsfolk staring, wondering what secrets lingered behind each of the palace's doors. Not long after, it was reported a 15-year-old enslaved girl made her way to the palace, unaware the governor had already fled to his warship. She hoped for the freedom she heard whispered in the quarters, but was soon returned to captivity. Late in June of 1775, a group of William and Mary students, among them the young James Madison, broke into the palace. They seized the stored muskets and swords kept there and helped themselves to some of the governor's personal property. A later claim by Dunmore stated the belongings he had left behind were worth nearly 35,000 pounds. From his warship on the York, Dunmore raged in letters to the crown while still attempting to govern the colony. But the palace told the story plainly. Royal leadership had vanished, leaving servants unsure, belongings unguarded, and power itself slipping away. By November 1775, Dunmore had reached the end of his options. Trapped on his warship in the York River, cut off from much of Virginia, he watched the colony slip toward open rebellion. The powder magazine had been taken by Virginia militia, the palace looted, and his authority was barely more than a name on a document. In a desperate move, Dunmore issued the proclamation he had threatened earlier.
I have thought fit to issue this my proclamation, hereby declaring that until the aforesaid good purposes can be obtained, I do, in virtue of the power and authority to me given by His Majesty, determine to execute martial law, and cause the same to be executed throughout this colony, and to the end that peace and good order may the sooner be restored, I do require every person capable of bearing arms to resort to His Majesty's standard, or be looked upon as traitors to His Majesty's crown and government.
Any enslaved Virginian who left the person they served and joined his forces would be granted freedom. For the enslaved, it offered hope. Dangerous, uncertain hope, but a chance to escape no less. For the colonists, it was terrifying, a direct threat to their homes and way of life. The proclamation was both a military tactic and a sign of Dunmore's isolation. It changed the stakes in Virginia, forcing everyone to confront a new reality. The rebellion was no longer only political. For the enslaved, it offered a perilous path toward freedom. For the colonists, it represented a direct challenge to their authority and control. After months desperately gathering military support and then issuing his proclamation, Dunmore tried to reclaim control of Virginia from aboard his ship anchored in the York River near Norfolk, where a small British fleet stood ready under his command. He raised the Ethiopian Regiment, composed of formerly enslaved Virginians seeking freedom, and enlisted loyalist volunteers to form the Queen's own Loyal Virginia Regiment, some of whom later joined the infamous Queen's Rangers during the Revolutionary War. These forces carried out raids throughout the Tidewater, targeting Patriot troops and plantations. Their most notable success came at Kemp's Landing in 1775, where they defeated a local militia, a rare victory in an increasingly hostile colony. Despite this, Patriot resistance was relentless. Militia forces, including the 2nd Virginia Regiment, composed of hundreds of men training in Williamsburg and alternating guard duty at the powder magazine with the 1st Virginia Regiment, were ordered to march to Norfolk. In pursuit of the city and getting closer by the day, alongside some of the Virginia regiments were the riflemen of the Culpeper Minutemen Battalion, whose company flag bore a rattlesnake and the slogans, "Liberty or Death" and "Don't Tread on Me." But even before their advance to Norfolk, these highly skilled fighters, whose rifles had superior range and accuracy compared with the typical Brown Bess muskets used by the enemy, were ordered to take out British soldiers manning cannons on ships attempting to bombard Hampton, Virginia. Their mission was a success, and the enemy's vessels fled. This firepower would soon prove to be beneficial during their next clash. When troops eventually arrived near Norfolk, they occupied the opposite side of an important river crossing near the village of Great Bridge, where Dunmore had established a military fortification on the other side. After a failed diversion strategy due to miscommunication by Lord Dunmore that was supposed to involve the Ethiopian Regiment made up of freed Africans, a British captain involved in the conflict without delay still made the hasty decision to cross the bridge, and continued fighting between the British and Patriots took place. This press forward proved deadly, as he and many redcoats were killed during their pursuit. With short-range volleys halting the assault, Colonel William Woodford of the 2nd Virginia Regiment ordered the Culpeper Minutemen to shift the long-range fire for maximum impact. With no way to combat the onslaught being dished out on the other side of the bridge, but the skill and sharp eyes of Culpeper, Orange, and Fauquier County's elite riflemen and other militia, the British were forced to retreat. Dunmore's forces were too small and isolated, and over the following months, he couldn't regain a lasting foothold, leaving him trapped on the river and powerless. But a threat still existed, as noted by George Washington, who had gotten word of all that was taking place in Virginia with Dunmore.
If that man is not crushed before spring, he will become the most formidable enemy America has. Nothing less than depriving him of life or liberty will secure peace to Virginia.
In January, Tensions in Norfolk erupted in open conflict between loyalists and patriots, leaving the town a battleground. Dunmore's ships bombarded patriot positions from the harbor, while his Ethiopian regiment and loyalist volunteers attempted to defend key points on land. Fire spread through the city, destroying homes and warehouses. Chaos gripped the streets. Militias were ordered by colonial leadership to burn the remaining abandoned parts of the city, once heavily occupied by loyalist supporters, to deny resources to the British. Despite desperate resistance, revolutionary forces gained the upper hand. By August of 1776, Dunmore was forced to flee from Virginia's coastal areas, retreating to his ships and leaving the colony to the rebels. The definitive end of his royal domination over Virginia. By July of 1776, the governor's palace in Williamsburg had a new leader. Patrick Henry, Virginia's first revolutionary governor, strode through its grand halls, bearing the hopes of the colony behind him. His presence marked more than a change in leadership. It signaled the end of an era, as Williamsburg itself braced for the future, no longer tethered to royal power. So when you step onto Palace Green today and see the governor's palace rising before you, think not only of the building itself, but of the last royal governor who once moved through its corridors. It may not be the palace he once knew, but it stands reconstructed to match its historic design, on the very ground where his uncertainty met the colony's bravery, marking the beginning of Virginia's fight for freedom.